From the Sabbath to the Lord's Day. Did you know that of the 10 Commandments, also known as the Decalogue, only 9 are reaffirmed in the New Testament? The only commandment that is missing is the command to observe the Sabbath. Nowhere in the New Testament are followers of Christ commanded to observe these regulations, and nowhere are there warnings for not observing them. Today we will look at the history regarding the Sabbath and the move in the New Testament to church to worshiping on Sunday, the Lord's Day. The Sabbath, which means rest, was first associated with the seventh day of creation story. Genesis 2 verses 2 and 3 tells us that God, after his work of creation was finished, rested. However, there is no further indication of God's desire that man also takes a day of rest until after the Exodus. The first time a command is given regarding the Sabbath appears in Exodus 16:23, when God tells the Israelites that the following day will be a day of complete rest, a holy Sabbath day set apart for the Lord. A similar commandment was later included in the formality of the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 to 11, where God refers back to creation and his own resting as a pattern for the Israelites to follow. A second reason is highlighted in the account of the 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5:12 through 15, where God refers back to the Israelites' deliverance from slavery as a reason to rest. Third, in Exodus 31, the Israelites are told to keep the Sabbath as a sign of the covenant between them and God. It was for this reason, a sign of the covenant, that the Sabbath regulations were included as part of the law. As Dr. J. Herndon says in his article, The Sabbath and the Christian, it's as if God said, I am choosing this day of the week to represent our covenant. I want you to honor this day and remember our covenant. As a result, the sin of breaking the Sabbath is not the act itself, but in the fact that it is also breaking the covenant. As Galatians 3:19 in part says, but the law was designed to last only until the coming of the child who was promised. So when the new covenant in Jesus was established, it superseded the old covenant. Since the Sabbath regulations were a sign of the covenant, when that new covenant appeared, the signs were replaced. We see in Acts that both signs of the old covenant, circumcision and the Sabbath, were not transferred or required of Gentile Christians. The sign of the Sabbath, a remembrance of the covenant and the Israelite deliverance from slavery, was replaced with the sign of the Lord's table, a remembrance of Christ's suffering and death. So why, given all this, did early Christians decide to worship on the first day of the week instead of the Sabbath? It seems most likely that this was due to the fact that Jesus was raised from the dead on the first day of the week, and that several of his post-resurrection appearances were also on the first day of the week. We see as early as Acts 20 that the disciples had begun gathering on the first day of the week. Some Christians at that time worshipped on both the Sabbath and on the first day, while others just worshipped on the Lord's Day. By the early 2nd century AD, it had become common practice for Christians to gather to worship on Sunday. It's important to note that these Christians did not attempt to make Sunday the new Sabbath and transfer all the old regulations. It simply became a new acceptable day to worship. I conclude with a statement by Matt Slick in his article titled, Should We Keep the Sabbath or Not?, where he says the Sabbath is fulfilled in Jesus because in him we have rest.